$800,000. That's what the loan application on my desk requested. I stared at the familiar name on the letterhead, William Parker, my father-in-law, and felt a surge of emotions I couldn't quite name. For 7 years, I'd endured his dismissive comments about my little job at Oakwood Financial. 7 years of him talking over me at family dinners when the conversation turned to investments or business strategy. 7 years of watching him pat my hand condescendingly when I offered even the most basic financial insights. And now, here he was, requesting a significant business loan from the very institution I secretly controlled. I closed the folder and gazed out the window of my corner office on the 32nd floor, overlooking the Boston skyline. The irony wasn't lost on me. William had no idea he was asking for money from his daughter-in-law, the same woman he'd told last Thanksgiving that banking is really more complicated than just balancing a checkbook, dear. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never planned to keep my success a secret from my husband's family. When I first met James Parker during my final year at Wharton, I was already making waves in the financial technology sector. My startup, SecurePay, had just secured its second round of funding, and I was being featured in business publications as a rising star in financial innovation. James was completing his medical residency at the same hospital where my father worked as chief of surgery. That's how we met, at a hospital fundraiser where I was representing my family while my parents were traveling. Our connection was instant. James was brilliant, compassionate, and refreshingly uninterested in my business accomplishments. "I deal with life and death all day," he told me on our third date. "It's nice to be with someone who lives in an entirely different world." For James, my work was just one facet of who I was, not my defining characteristic. After years of dating, men who either felt threatened by my success or saw me as a stepping stone for their own ambitions, James's genuine interest in me as a person was like a breath of fresh air. We married 18 months later in a small ceremony with close family and friends. By then, SecurePay had been acquired by a major financial services corporation for a sum that set me up for life at just 28 years old. I signed a 2-year consulting contract with the acquiring company and was contemplating my next move. That's when everything changed. The first time I met James's parents was at our engagement dinner. William and Margaret Parker hosted us at their sprawling Beacon Hill home, a historic property that had been in William's family for generations. The evening began pleasantly enough, with Margaret showing me family photos and William pouring expensive wine while boasting about James's medical achievements. "And what is it that you do, Olivia?" Margaret finally asked, her smile polite, but her eyes evaluating. "I work in financial technology," I replied. "I founded a payment processing platform that—" "She's being modest," James interrupted proudly. "Olivia sold her company for millions. She's a regular tech genius." I saw something flicker across William's face, surprise, followed by what looked unsettlingly like skepticism. "Is that so?" he said, swirling his wine. "How interesting. I've been in investment banking for 30 years. Which firm acquired? Your company?" I told him, expecting him to be impressed. Instead, he frowned slightly. I know their CEO, Thomas. Nice fellow. Surprising he never mentioned this acquisition to me. Must have been quite small." That was the first inkling I had that my relationship with the Parkers might be complicated. Throughout dinner, William questioned me about financial markets, investment strategies, and economic theories. His tone wasn't curious. It was challenging, as if he was administering an oral exam I hadn't prepared for. Later that night, I overheard him speaking to James in the kitchen. "She seems nice enough, son, but are you sure she's being straight with you about this business success? I know these tech startups. They throw around big valuations that aren't based in reality. Just be careful she's not exaggerating her achievements to impress you." James defended me, of course, but the seed had been planted. In William's mind, I was either lying about my success or had just gotten lucky with a one-time business fluke. Either way, he didn't see me as a legitimate business person deserving of respect. Over the following months, a pattern emerged. At family gatherings, William would talk at length about his investment deals, the boards he sat on, and the financial advice he gave to his wealthy clients. If I contributed to these conversations, he would smile indulgently and then continue as if I hadn't spoken. When I disagreed with his financial assessments, which happened often as William's investment philosophy was notably conservative and sometimes outdated, he would chuckle and tell James, "Your fiancée has spirit, I'll give her that." Margaret wasn't much better. Her dismissiveness took a different form, focusing on my apparent lack of domestic skills and social graces. "Didn't your mother teach you how to properly set a formal table?" Or, "I suppose when you're focused on business, you don't have time to learn about wine pairings." The commentary was delivered with a smile, but the message was clear. In her eyes, I had sacrificed true femininity and refinement on the altar of career ambition. By the time our wedding arrived, I had made a decision. I wouldn't try to prove myself to William and Margaret. Their perception of me seemed fixed, and constantly defending my credentials was exhausting and ultimately futile. James understood who I was and valued me completely. That was what mattered. "They'll come around eventually," James assured me. "They're just from a different generation. Dad's not used to young women in finance, and Mom's only ever been a homemaker. Give them time." So I stepped back. During family gatherings, I redirected conversations away from my work. When asked directly about my career plans after the SecurePay acquisition, I was deliberately vague. "I'm exploring my options," became my standard response. This strategy reduced friction but had an unintended consequence. The Parkers began to assume my career was floundering. 6 months after our wedding, William offered to put in a word for me at his bank. Just an entry-level position in retail. "Banking," he clarified, "but it would give you a foot in the door. Everyone has to start somewhere." I thanked him politely but declined. 2 weeks later, I used a portion of my SecurePay proceeds to quietly purchase a controlling interest in Oakwood Financial, a regional bank with 8 branches that was struggling to modernize its operations. The opportunity was perfect. A solid, financial institution with good bones but outdated technology and management. The existing chairman was retiring, and the board was receptive to new leadership with a vision for digital transformation. Instead of announcing my position as the new chairwoman and majority shareholder, I installed a trusted colleague as the public-facing CEO while I guided strategy from behind the scenes with the title Chief Innovation Officer. To most of the world, I was simply a high-level executive, not the principal owner. When the Parkers asked about my new job, I described my role in the vaguest terms possible. I'm working with a local bank on their digital strategy. This was technically true, but dramatically understated my position. William nodded approvingly, seemingly satisfied that I had finally accepted my place on the lower rungs of the financial ladder. "Retail banking is a good place to learn the basics," he told me at Sunday dinner shortly after I started. "Maybe in a few years you could move up to loan processing or branch management." James looked at me with a mixture of confusion and amusement as I nodded along with his father's condescending career advice. Later that night, he questioned my restraint. "Why don't you just tell them you own the bank?" he asked as we got ready for bed. Dad's face would be priceless. I considered the question seriously. "It's not about hiding my success to spare. Their feelings," I explained. "Right now, they've put me in a box they understand. The younger wife with modest career ambitions. If I suddenly revealed that I own Oakwood, they wouldn't reevaluate their perception of me. They'd just create a new narrative where I'm the lucky beneficiary of your family's wealth and connections, or where I'm exaggerating my role." "James, couldn't argue with this assessment. He had witnessed his parents' remarkable ability to reshape reality to fit their preconceptions. Besides, I added, there are legitimate business reasons for keeping my ownership private. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Banking is a relationship business built on trust and stability. Clients and partners might be hesitant if they knew a young tech entrepreneur was suddenly controlling a century-old financial institution. So, our arrangement continued. Oakwood Financial, I led a major digital transformation, introduced innovative lending products, and expanded our commercial banking services. Under my direction, we acquired 2 smaller banks and grew from 8 branches to 17 within 3 years. Our loan portfolio expanded by 46%, while our default rate decreased thanks to advanced risk assessment algorithms I developed based on my fintech experience. At Parker family gatherings, I was still just James's wife who works at a bank. William continued to offer unsolicited career advice, explaining banking concepts to me that I had literally written papers about during my time at Wharton. Margaret continued to express polite disappointment that I was focusing on my little job instead of giving her grandchildren. The situation reached peak irony when William began moving some of his business to Oakwood Financial. Their commercial rates are quite competitive, he mentioned at dinner one evening, and their new digital platform is surprisingly sophisticated for a regional bank. I opened an account there last month. I nearly choked on my wine as James kicked me gently under the table. That's nice to hear, I managed. I'll pass the compliment along to the management team. You do that, William said, patting my hand. Maybe it will help you move up a bit faster. 2 years turned into 4, and 4 into 7. Oakwood Financial continued to thrive under my direction, though I remained largely in the background publicly. James's medical career flourished as he became one of Boston's most respected cardiologists. We bought a beautiful brownstone in Back Bay and traveled extensively during his limited time off. The only persistent cloud in our otherwise happy life was the ongoing tension with his parents, who continued to view me as something between a disappointment and a curiosity. Then came the loan application that would change everything. I first heard about William's financial troubles from James, who mentioned casually that his father seemed stressed about some investment issues. A week later, the loan request appeared. On my desk, William Parker was seeking $800,000 to cover losses from a real estate development project gone wrong. According to the application, William had invested heavily in a luxury condominium development in an up-and-coming area of Boston. The project had faced multiple setbacks. Construction delays, cost overruns, and changing market conditions had all contributed to a situation where William needed significant capital to prevent the project from collapsing entirely. I studied the business plan and financial projections attached to the application. The development wasn't fundamentally flawed, but William had overextended himself financially and miscalculated several key factors, exactly the kind of errors he had often implied I would make due to my limited understanding of sophisticated financial matters. I sat with this information for a full day, unsure how to proceed. The loan request would typically go through our commercial lending department, but as a significant request from a high-profile client, it had been flagged for executive review. No one at the bank questioned why it landed on my desk, given my role as Chief Innovation Officer. They assumed I was reviewing the technological integration aspects, not making the final lending decision. From a strictly business perspective, the loan was risky but potentially viable with the right modifications and guarantees. From a personal perspective, I was facing a complex ethical dilemma. Did my history with William create a conflict of interest that should require me to recuse myself? Or did I have an obligation to use my insider knowledge of his character and financial judgment to protect the bank's interests? After careful consideration, I decided on a middle path. I would neither approve nor reject the loan outright. Instead, I would meet with William as a representative of Oakwood Financial to discuss modifications to his proposal that would make it acceptable to the bank. This meeting would require me to step out of the shadows and reveal at least part of my role at the bank. I arranged for the meeting to take place in my office, not the modest workspace I maintained on the retail banking floor where I occasionally made appearances to maintain my cover story, but my actual executive office on the 32nd floor with its impressive views and obvious markers of authority. When my assistant showed William in, I was reviewing the final details of a major acquisition we would be announcing the following week. I looked up to see confusion wash over his face as he tried to reconcile my presence in this clearly important office. "Olivia?" he said, hesitating at the threshold. "There must be some mistake. I'm here to meet with bank executives about my loan application." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "There's no mistake, William. Please, have a seat." He entered cautiously, looking around as if expecting to find the real executives hiding somewhere. "I don't understand. Do you work on this floor?" "I do," I confirmed, keeping my tone professional and neutral. "I'm reviewing your loan application on behalf of Oakwood Financial." William gave a small, relieved laugh. "Oh, I see. They're having you gather some preliminary information before my meeting with the decision-makers. That makes sense. Well, I appreciate your help, but this is a rather significant and complex commercial loan. I'll need to speak with someone from senior management, preferably Anthony Caldwell. I understand he's the CEO. I maintained eye contact as I replied. "Anthony reports to me, William. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer and a member of the executive leadership team. Your loan application requires approval at my level, given both its size and some concerning aspects of the risk profile." The transformation of William's expression would have been comical in any other context. Disbelief gave way to confusion, then to a sort of desperate denial. "There must be some misunderstanding," he insisted. "You work in retail banking. James told us." "James told you I work at Oakwood Financial," I corrected gently. "Which is true. The nature of my position is something you assumed." William fell silent, visibly processing this information. I could practically see him reformulating his understanding of the past 7 years, recalculating every interaction in light of this new information. "So you've been an executive here all this time?" he finally managed. This was the moment of decision. I could continue with the partial truth that I was merely an executive, or I could reveal the full extent of my position. I chose the latter. "I'm more than an executive, William. I'm the majority shareholder and chairwoman of Oakwood Financial. I led the acquisition of this bank 7 years ago after the success of my financial technology company." The color drained from William's face. That's not possible. You would have mentioned—" "Would I have?" I interrupted, my voice still calm but now carrying an edge. "When exactly would that information have been welcomed? When you were explaining basic financial concepts to me at family dinners? When you were dismissing my career as playing with computers? Or perhaps when you told James that my business success was probably exaggerated?" William had the grace to look ashamed. "You heard that." I did. A long silence stretched between us. Finally, William straightened his shoulders, visibly composing himself. "I see. Well, this is unexpected. But I'm here about the loan. My application has several issues that need to be addressed," I finished for him. "The debt-to-equity ratio is concerning. Your cash flow projections are overly optimistic, and you've underestimated the remaining construction costs by approximately 15% based on current market conditions." William blinked, clearly not expecting such a specific critique. "How could you possibly know?" "Because this is my area of expertise, William. It has been for the past decade." I opened a folder on my desk and pushed it toward him. Inside was a modified proposal I had prepared with adjusted terms, additional collateral requirements, and a restructured repayment schedule. This version of the loan would be acceptable to the bank, I explained. It includes third-party oversight of the remaining construction, quarterly rather than annual reviews, and slightly higher interest to offset the risk profile. William stared at the document, then back at me. The man who had spent years talking over me, dismissing my opinions, and treating me as financially naive, was now confronted with incontrovertible evidence of my expertise and authority. And not just any authority over his financial future. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked quietly. "All these years, at every family gathering, you let me patronize you about banking and finance when I owned the bank," I finished for him. "Tell me honestly, William, if I had told you 7 years ago that I had purchased Oakwood Financial, would you have believed me? Or would you have assumed I was exaggerating my role to impress you?" His silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought," I continued. "It wasn't about deception, William. It was about recognizing that no amount of evidence would change how you and Margaret had decided to see me. So I stopped trying to prove myself to you. I focused instead on building something significant and letting my work speak for itself." William studied the modified loan proposal, running a hand through his silver hair. I could see him struggling to reconcile his perception of me with the reality sitting across from him. "These terms are fair," he finally admitted. "More than fair, given the risk factors you've identified." He looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, there was something like genuine respect in his eyes. "You really know what you're doing?" "Yes," I said simply. "I do." William nodded slowly, then extended his hand across the desk. "I believe I owe you an apology, Olivia. Several apologies, in fact. I've been less than respectful of your capabilities." I accepted his handshake, feeling an unexpected sense of closure. "Apology accepted. Now, shall we discuss how to save your development project?" Over the next 2 hours, William and I dissected his real estate development project in detail. With my background in risk assessment and his knowledge of the Boston property market, we identified both the critical weaknesses and untapped opportunities in the luxury condominium development. "The fundamental concept is sound," I explained, pulling up market research on my computer. "The North End is gentrifying faster than your initial projections anticipated. The issue isn't the location or even the design. It's the financing structure and construction management." William nodded, the initial shock of discovering my true position at the bank now replaced by focused attention. "The general contractor has missed 3 deadlines already. Every delay increases carrying costs." "Exactly. Your return on investment calculations didn't account for an 18-month construction timeline stretching to 27 months. I pulled up a spreadsheet I had created based on his loan application data. At current interest rates, each month of delay costs you approximately $42,000 in additional financing expenses, not counting lost revenue from delayed occupancy. William studied the numbers, his expression grave. "That explains the cash flow crisis. Even with pre-sales on 7 units, I can't close on them until construction is complete." I nodded. "Which is why the bank can't approve the loan as originally structured. The risk profile is too high." Something shifted in William's demeanor as he watched me analyze his business situation. The condescension that had characterized our previous interactions was gone, replaced by something that looked surprisingly like respect. "You've thoroughly reviewed this," he observed. "Most loan officers would have simply rejected the application." "I'm not most loan officers," I reminded him. "And Oakwood Financial isn't most banks. We specialize in finding workable solutions, not just evaluating risk on paper." I outlined the restructured plan I had developed. Oakwood would provide the $800,000 financing, but with strings attached. William would need to bring in a new construction management team approved by the bank. 10% of the loan would be held in reserve until specific construction milestones were met. And importantly, the interest rate would float based on timeline adherence, stay on schedule, and the rate remained favorable. Miss deadlines, and it would increase. These terms are stringent but fair, William acknowledged, reviewing the proposal. You're essentially creating accountability structures I should have implemented from the beginning. I smiled slightly. Oversight isn't just for the bank's protection. It's for yours, too. The current contractor has every incentive to drag out this project. Their fee structure rewards them for time rather than efficiency. William shook his head, a rueful expression crossing his face. I pride myself on financial acumen, yet I missed something so fundamental. It happens to the best of us, I said, surprising myself with the generosity in my tone. Real estate development requires specialized knowledge that differs from investment banking. Different risk profiles, different management approaches. William looked at me with newfound curiosity. Where did you learn real estate financing? Your background is in financial technology, isn't it? When I acquired Oakwood, our loan portfolio was heavily weighted toward commercial real estate, I explained. I had to become an expert quickly. I spent 6 months studying property development, working with experienced underwriters, and attending construction sites to understand the practical realities behind the spreadsheets. William nodded slowly. You did your homework. I always do, I replied simply. An uncomfortable silence fell between us, heavy with the weight of 7 years of misunderstandings and dismissals. William shifted in his chair, clearly struggling with something. Olivia, he finally said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. I owe you more than a simple apology. I've been patronizing you for years, dismissing your financial insights, treating you as if your career was some temporary diversion before settling into what I considered a proper role for my son's wife. His candor surprised me. William Parker was not a man accustomed to admitting he was wrong. Yes, I agreed. You have. He winced at my direct acknowledgement but continued. I've been in banking for 35 years. I'm used to being the smartest person in the room when it comes to financial matters. And I suppose I couldn't reconcile the idea that a woman your age could possibly... He trailed off, aware of how his words sounded. Possibly know more than you? I finished for him, keeping my tone neutral despite the familiar frustration rising within me. William had the grace to look embarrassed. It sounds terribly arrogant when stated plainly. It is arrogant, I confirmed. And it's cost you? More than you realize. He looked up sharply. What do you mean? Last year, Oakwood Financial partnered with 3 investment groups to fund a major urban renewal project in South Boston, I explained. The return on investment has been 22% above initial projections. Your bank bid on that project but lost. Do you know why? William frowned. Their proposal was more aggressive than ours. We assumed they were taking unnecessary risks. No, I corrected. Their analytics were simply better. They recognized value where traditional metrics missed it. The same kind of analytics I tried to discuss with you at Christmas 2 years ago, when you told me I was cute for thinking that alternative data could predict property values more accurately than traditional models. William's expression changed as memory dawned. That urban renewal project, that was your analytics model? I nodded. The one you dismissed without consideration. By the way, 3 other major banks have since licensed that model from us. It's generating 7 figures in annual licensing fees alone. William sat back in his chair, visibly processing this information. All this time, while I've been offering you condescending career advice, I've been building one of the most innovative regional banks in New England, I finished. Yes. The silence that followed was weighted with 7 years of miscommunication and missed opportunities. Finally, William shook his head. James knew all along, didn't he? Of course, I confirmed. He's my husband and my partner. We don't keep secrets from each other. Yet he never corrected me, even when I was being insufferable about your career. I smiled slightly. That was at my request. James wanted to set the record straight many times. I asked him not to. Why? William asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Why let me continue making a fool of myself? I considered how to answer this question. The truth was complex and not entirely flattering to either of us. Initially, it was because I knew you wouldn't believe him, I said finally. Your perception of me was fixed. No statement from James would have changed how you saw me. It would only have created tension between you two. And later, William pressed. Later. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Later, it became clear that your opinion of my financial acumen wasn't based on evidence or experience, but on preconceptions about who could possess expertise in this field. Trying to change that through assertions or credentials seemed pointless. William absorbed this, his expression thoughtful. So you decided to let your work speak for itself? Yes, though I never anticipated that the revelation would come quite like this. William gestured to the loan proposal between us. With me needing your financial help. Life has a sense of irony sometimes. Another silence fell, this one less tense than before. William studied me with new eyes, reassessing years of interactions through a different lens. Does Margaret know? He finally asked. No, just James. William nodded slowly. She'll be mortified when she finds out. All those comments about your little job and how you should focus on giving us grandchildren instead of working at the bank. I felt a twinge of sympathy for my mother-in-law, despite everything. Margaret's dismissiveness had always seemed less deliberate than William's, born more from generational and cultural differences than active condescension. Perhaps we can find a way to make the revelation less uncomfortable for her, I suggested. William raised an eyebrow. That's surprisingly generous of you, given how she's treated you. It's not entirely altruistic, I admitted. Family harmony benefits everyone, including me and James. William's expression softened. He chose well when he married you, better than I realized. He gathered the loan documents, tucking them into his leather portfolio. I assume there are formal papers to sign. My assistant will have everything ready tomorrow morning, I confirmed. 9 o'clock? I'll be here, William promised, standing to leave. At the door, he paused. Olivia, thank you. Not just for considering the loan, but for... He gestured vaguely, searching for words. Not saying, I told you so? I suggested with a small smile. He laughed, a genuine sound I'd rarely heard. From him. Yes, that. After William left, I remained at my desk, processing the encounter. 7 years of carefully maintained professional separation had collapsed in a single afternoon. The boundary between my family life and my role at Oakwood Financial had dissolved, with consequences I couldn't fully predict. I called James at the hospital, catching him between patient consultations. It happened, I said when he answered. Your father knows. Knows what? James asked, distracted. About Oakwood, about me, everything. There was a moment of silence. Then James's voice came through, suddenly focused. Wait, what? How? We've been keeping that under wraps for years. I explained the loan application, the meeting, and the revelations that had followed. Wow, James said when I finished. I wish I could have seen his face. It was enlightening, I acknowledged. He actually apologized, sincerely, I think. Dad apologized? James sounded genuinely shocked. I'm not sure I've ever heard him do that. People can surprise you. So what happens now? James asked. With the loan? With Sunday dinners? It was a good question. The carefully compartmentalized existence I'd maintained for 7 years had been upended. There was no going back to the previous dynamic. "The loan will proceed with the modified terms," I said. "As for family gatherings, I guess we'll have to navigate a new normal." "Mom's going to freak out," James predicted. "Your father mentioned the same thing." He seemed concerned about her reaction. James was quiet for a moment. "You know, despite everything, I think they might actually come to respect you once the shock wears off. Dad values success and competence above almost everything else. You've demonstrated both on a scale he can't dismiss." "We'll see," I said, not entirely convinced. Years of ingrained perceptions didn't change overnight, even with compelling evidence. "I've got to get to my next patient," James said. "But Olivia, I'm proud of you. Not just for your success with the bank, but for how you handled this with Dad. You could have made him grovel. From what you've described, you were gracious." "Groveling wouldn't serve any purpose," I replied pragmatically. "We still have to see each other at holidays." James laughed. "Always the strategic thinker. I love you." "Love you too." After hanging up, I gazed out at the Boston skyline as afternoon shifted toward evening. The city was beautiful from this height, its historic architecture blending with modern glass towers in the golden light. Somewhere out there was William's troubled development project, the luxury condominiums that had brought him to my office and changed the course of our relationship. My assistant knocked gently on the door, interrupting my thoughts. "Ms. Chen, the executive team is assembled for the quarterly strategy meeting." "Thank you, Diane. I'll be right there." Life continued. Business decisions needed making. The bank wouldn't run itself while I contemplated family dynamics. I gathered my materials and headed to the conference room, where my leadership team awaited direction on Oakwood's next phase of growth. The following morning, William arrived precisely at 9. He brought with him detailed records of the development, project that hadn't been included in the original loan application, construction schedules, contractor agreements, architectural modifications, and pre-sale contracts. He'd clearly spent the evening preparing for this meeting as he would for any serious business negotiation. "I thought these might help you assess the project more thoroughly," he explained, laying out the documents on my desk. I appreciated the gesture for what it was, a tangible acknowledgement of my expertise and authority. "Thank you. This level of detail will be helpful." As we reviewed the additional materials, I noticed a shift in how William interacted with me. Gone was the condescending tone, replaced by the same respectful attention he would give to any respected financial peer. He listened when I spoke, engaged thoughtfully with my questions, and acknowledged when my analysis uncovered issues he had overlooked. "Your assessment of the contractor's incentive structure is spot on," he admitted after I walked him through my concerns about the construction management. "I was focused on their bid price, not the timeline penalties, or lack thereof." "It's a common oversight," I said. "The initial savings are obvious. The long-term costs of delays are harder to quantify until you're experiencing them." William nodded, then hesitated before speaking again. "Olivia, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about how I've treated you over the years." I looked up from the documents, giving him my full attention. "I've always prided myself on being a rational man," he continued. "Someone who makes judgments based on evidence, not preconceptions. Yesterday made me realize how false that self-image is." He met my eyes directly. "I judged you from our first meeting, and nothing you could have said or done would have changed that judgment. I want you to know that I recognize how unfair that was." The admission clearly didn't come easily to him. William Parker, pillar of Boston financial society, was not accustomed to acknowledging fundamental flaws in his worldview. "Thank you for saying that," I responded, genuinely touched by the effort. "Self-reflection isn't easy for any of us." "No, it isn't," he agreed with a rueful smile. "Particularly at my age, we become set in our ways of thinking." It's never too late to broaden one's perspective, I offered. William nodded thoughtfully. Margaret and I would like to have you and James over for dinner this weekend. Not our usual Sunday family dinner, but something different. Would Saturday evening work for you both? The invitation took me by surprise. Does Margaret know about my position at Oakwood? Not yet, William admitted. I thought it might. Be better coming from you in person, if you're comfortable with that. I considered the suggestion. There was something appealing about the opportunity to reshape Margaret's perception of me on my own terms, rather than having it filtered through William. Saturday should work, I confirmed. I'll check with James and let you know for certain. Excellent. William gathered his papers as our meeting concluded. At the door, he paused. One more thing, Olivia. I'd like your permission to move more of my business to Oakwood Financial. Not because we're family, though we are, but because I'm impressed with how you've transformed this institution. Your digital platforms are years ahead of what my current primary bank offers, and your risk assessment models are clearly superior to theirs. I smiled at the professional compliment, which meant more coming from him than it might have from anyone else. We'd be happy to have more of your business, William. I'll have our private banking team contact you. After he left, I called James to discuss the dinner invitation. Saturday at your parents' house, I repeated after explaining the situation. Your father suggested I tell your mother about Oakwood myself. How do you feel about that? James asked cautiously. I considered the question. Surprisingly okay. After yesterday, I think I'm ready for everything to be out in the open. Living a compartmentalized life has been more exhausting than I realized. Mom will be shocked, James warned. But I think Dad's right. It should come from you, not him. Do you think she'll be upset? James was quiet for a moment. Not upset exactly. Embarrassed, probably. She's said some pretty dismissive things about your career over the years. That's putting it mildly, I agreed, remembering Margaret's frequent suggestions that I was wasting my education by working at a small local bank instead of starting a family. But Mom's different from Dad in one important way, James continued. She cares deeply about family harmony. Once she processes the initial shock, she'll be motivated to make things right between you. I hope so, I said, not entirely convinced. Saturday it is then. The remainder of the week passed in a blur of executive decisions and strategic planning. Oakwood Financial was in the final stages of acquiring a financial technology startup that specialized in small business lending, a move that would significantly expand our capabilities in an underserved market segment. The integration planning consumed most of my attention, pushing family dynamics temporarily to the background. By Saturday evening, however, there was no avoiding the imminent conversation with Margaret. James and I arrived at the Parkers' Beacon Hill home at precisely 7, bearing a bottle of expensive wine and a careful strategy for how to approach the evening. Margaret greeted us warmly, embracing James and offering me her customary air kiss. You both look wonderful. Come in, come in. William is decanting the wine in the sitting room. The Parker home was exactly as I remembered it. Tastefully decorated in traditional New England style, with antique furniture, oriental rugs, and oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors on the walls. It exuded old money and established position, which had always been part of its intimidating effect. William stood as we entered the sitting room, his expression noticeably different from our usual family gatherings. Gone was the slightly patronizing smile, replaced by genuine warmth and, most surprisingly, a hint of nervousness. James, Olivia, thank you for coming. He poured wine for everyone, then raised his glass. To family, and to seeing each other clearly. James shot me a curious glance at the toast, clearly noting the change in his father's demeanor. Margaret, oblivious to the underlying current, smiled pleasantly. What a lovely sentiment, William, though I'm not sure what's prompted this philosophical mood. The three of us exchanged glances, and an unspoken agreement passed between me and William. Now wasn't the moment. There would be time for revelations after dinner, when everyone was relaxed and comfortable. Conversation flowed more easily than I expected during the meal. William asked thoughtful questions about my work at the bank, carefully phrasing them, to allow me to share as much or as little as I felt comfortable revealing. James followed his father's lead, maintaining the delicate balance until the right moment arrived. It wasn't until we had moved to the sitting room with after-dinner drinks that Margaret provided the perfect opening. "Olivia, dear," she began in her usual well-meaning but condescending tone. "William mentioned you were involved in reviewing some loan applications at your bank. How nice that they're giving you more responsibility. Perhaps a promotion to loan officer might be in your future." William nearly choked on his brandy. James suppressed a smile, and I realized the moment had arrived. "Actually, Margaret," I said carefully, "my position at Oakwood Financial is a bit more substantial than you might have gathered from our previous conversations." Margaret tilted her head with polite interest. "Oh? Have you been promoted? Recently?" "Not recently, no." I took a deep breath. "I've been the majority shareholder and chairwoman of Oakwood Financial for the past 7 years, since shortly after James and I got married." Margaret froze, her sherry glass halfway to her lips. "I don't understand." "Olivia owns the bank, Mom," James clarified gently. "She's not an employee, she's the boss." Margaret turned to William, clearly expecting him to contradict this outlandish claim. Instead, he nodded confirmation. "It's true, Margaret. I only discovered it myself this week, when I applied for a business loan. Olivia is not only the owner, but has been the driving force behind Oakwood's remarkable growth and innovation." Margaret set down her glass with a shaking hand. But you've always said you worked in retail banking. At family dinners, when we discussed financial matters." "I never actually said I worked in retail banking," I corrected softly. "That was an assumption. One I chose not to correct." "But why would you?" Margaret trailed off, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and the dawning horror of realization. "Oh my goodness. All those things I've said over the years, about your little job and how you should focus on starting a family. Instead of..." She covered her mouth with her hand, clearly mortified. "It's all right, Margaret," I assured her, feeling an unexpected wave of sympathy. "You didn't know." "But I should have known," she exclaimed. "I should have asked more questions, shown more interest. Instead, I just assumed." She looked stricken. "You must think I'm terribly narrow-minded." "I think you had a certain idea of what your son's wife would be like," I suggested gently. "And when I didn't fit that idea, you tried to reshape me into something more familiar and comfortable." Margaret nodded miserably. "That's precisely what I did, without even realizing it." She turned to William. "And you've known about this? For how long?" "Since Tuesday," William admitted. "When I went to the bank about the North End development loan and found myself sitting in Olivia's executive office, being schooled on the flaws in my business plan." Despite the tension of the moment, Margaret let out a small laugh. "Oh, I wish I could have seen your face." "It was quite a moment," William acknowledged, smiling ruefully. Margaret turned back to me, her expression now curious rather than shocked. "Tell me about it. The bank, I mean. How did this come about? William says you've transformed it." And so I did. For the next hour, I shared the story of how I had acquired Oakwood Financial, the vision I had for modernizing regional banking, and the success we had achieved over the past 7 years. Margaret listened with genuine interest, asking insightful questions that revealed a sharper mind than she had ever shown in our previous interactions. "You've accomplished all this while keeping it separate from family gatherings?" she marveled. "That must have been exhausting." "It was a choice," I acknowledged. one that seemed necessary at the time. "Because we made you feel unwelcome," Margaret said softly. "Like your accomplishments wouldn't be valued or believed." I didn't contradict her. There was no point in denying what we all now recognized as true. "Well," she continued, straightening her shoulders, "that ends tonight. I want to know everything about your work from now on. No more compartmentalization, as you put it." I glanced at James, who was watching the interaction with a mixture of relief and amusement. He raised his eyebrows slightly, as if to say, "See? I told you she'd come around." "I'd like that," I told Margaret sincerely. As the evening drew to a close, Margaret insisted on walking us to the door herself, leaving William to clear the glasses. "Olivia," she said quietly as James stepped outside to hail a rideshare, "I owe you an apology. Actually, many apologies for years of thoughtless comments and dismissive attitudes." "It's in the past," I assured her. Margaret shook her head firmly. "No, it needs to be acknowledged. I had a very traditional upbringing and an equally traditional marriage. My generation of women, especially in banking families like ours, was raised to believe our primary value lay in supporting our husbands and raising children. I projected those expectations onto you without considering that the world has changed, and that women like you are rightfully claiming spaces previously reserved for men." Her insight surprised me. "Thank you for saying that, Margaret. It means a lot." She hesitated, then asked tentatively, "Would you consider having lunch with me next week? I'd like to get to know the real you, not the version I imagined or tried to mold." "I'd enjoy that," I said, and meant it. As James and I rode home through the nighttime streets of Boston, I reflected on how completely the dynamic with my in-laws had shifted in the span of a single week. "You were right," I admitted to James. "Your mother took it better than I expected." He smiled, squeezing my hand. "Mom's always valued family peace above all else. Once she realized how badly she'd misjudged you, her priority immediately became repairing the relationship." "And your father?" "Dad's more complicated," James acknowledged. "His identity is wrapped up in being the financial authority. Discovering that his daughter-in-law has quietly outperformed him in his own field is challenging for his self-image." "He seemed to be handling it well tonight." "I think he is. Dad respects competence and success, even when it threatens his ego. Give him time. I believe he'll come to see your relationship as an asset rather than a challenge." I leaned my head against James's shoulder, suddenly tired. The week's revelations and emotional navigations had drained me more than any complex banking negotiation. "I've been compartmentalizing for so long," I murmured. "It's strange to think about integrating these separate parts of my life." "Is it a good strange or a bad strange?" James asked. I considered the question. "Good, I think. Exhausting, but good. Like setting down a heavy burden I didn't realize I was carrying." James kissed the top of my head. "No more hiding who you are. No more downplaying your success to make others comfortable." "No more," I agreed, watching the city lights blur past the car window. "From now on, just one unified life." Mitat? As our car turned onto our street, I thought about the upcoming week. I had the lunch with Margaret to look forward to. The loan for William's development project would be finalized. The financial technology acquisition would enter its final phase. And for the first time, all these aspects of my life would exist in harmony rather than in carefully separated compartments. It wasn't how I had imagined my secret would finally be revealed. There had been no dramatic confrontation, no vindictive triumph over those who had dismissed me. Instead, there had been honest conversations, genuine apologies, and the tentative beginnings of more authentic relationships. Perhaps, I reflected as we entered our home, that was the better ending after all. Monday morning arrived with the familiar rhythm of executive responsibilities. I entered Oakwood Financial's headquarters through the private elevator that connected the underground parking garage directly to the executive floor, a luxury I rarely indulged in, preferring most days to enter through the main lobby like any other employee. Today, however, felt different. After years of compartmentalizing my professional identity, I was stepping fully into the integrated life I had discussed with James. Anthony Caldwell, my longtime colleague who had served as the bank's public-facing co, was waiting in my office with coffee and a knowing smile. "I heard William Parker came to see you last week," he said, handing me a steaming cup. "Twice." I accepted the coffee with a grateful nod. News travels fast. "The executive floor has been buzzing. Your father-in-law is something of a legend in Boston banking circles." Anthony leaned against my desk. "I take it the carefully maintained separation between your family life and Oakwood is shifting?" "More like collapsing entirely," I confirmed, setting down my bag and taking a sip of the perfectly prepared coffee. Anthony had been my closest ally since the acquisition of Oakwood, one of the few people who knew the full story of my compartmentalized existence. He came in for a business loan and found himself face to face with his supposedly entry-level daughter-in-law. Anthony chuckled. I would have paid good money to see his expression. "It was certainly memorable," I agreed, smiling despite myself. "And now?" Anthony asked, his tone turning serious. "How does this change things for the bank? For your role here?" It was a fair question. For 7 years, I had operated primarily behind the scenes, allowing Anthony to serve as the public face of Oakwood Financial while I drove strategy and innovation. The arrangement had worked well for both of us. Anthony enjoyed the visibility and stakeholder relationships, while I preferred focusing on the technical and strategic elements that truly energized me. "It's time for some changes," I acknowledged. "The separation no longer serves any purpose, personal or professional. I think we need to formalize the actual leadership structure of Oakwood rather than maintaining the public-private distinction." Anthony nodded thoughtfully. "I've been expecting this conversation for a while. To be honest, I'm surprised it took this long." "Would you be comfortable transitioning to president and COO?" I asked directly. "With me stepping formally into the CEO role alongside my position as chairwoman?" "More than comfortable," Anthony replied without hesitation. "Frankly, this better reflects how we've been operating behind the scenes anyway. And with the fintech acquisition closing next month, it makes sense to clarify leadership now." I felt a surge of gratitude for Anthony's professionalism and support. In an industry often characterized by ego and power struggles, his collaborative approach had been instrumental to Oakwood's success. "Thank you," I said sincerely. "I'll have legal draft the necessary documentation and we can announce the reorganization at next week's board meeting." "Perfect timing," Anthony agreed. "And speaking of timing, your 9:30 is waiting in the conference room, the formal loan closing for Parker Development's North End project." I glanced at my watch, surprised to find it was already 9:25. "I need to review the final documentation before the signing." "Already on your desk," Anthony assured me, moving toward the door. "Oh, and Olivia, it's about time everyone knew exactly who's been leading this bank. Your vision deserves proper recognition." After he left, I quickly reviewed the loan documents. Everything was in order. The $800,000 commercial construction loan structured exactly as I had outlined in my meeting with William, with all the oversight provisions and performance incentives intact. The terms were stringent but fair, protecting the bank's interests while giving William's project a viable path forward. At precisely 9:30, I entered the conference room to find William already seated with his attorney, a distinguished older gentleman I recognized from Boston legal circles. What surprised me was the third person at the table, Margaret Parker, elegantly dressed and looking decidedly out of place in the business setting. "Good morning," I greeted them, momentarily taken aback by my mother-in-law's presence. William stood. "Olivia, thank you for making time for this. You remember Gerald Whitman, my attorney. and of course Margaret. I shook Gerald's hand and nodded to Margaret, still uncertain why she was attending a business loan closing. Margaret asked to join us today, William explained, seeming to read my confusion. She's been a silent partner in my real estate ventures for years, but after our conversation Saturday evening, she expressed interest in taking a more active role. Margaret smiled, a hint of nervousness visible beneath her composed exterior. I realize this is irregular, Olivia, but when William explained the project and the financial restructuring you proposed, I found myself curious about the process. After all, I've been a passive investor in William's developments for 30 years without ever fully understanding the mechanics. Her candor surprised me. The Margaret Parker I thought I knew would never have admitted to lacking knowledge. In any area, particularly not to me. I'm glad you're here, I said sincerely, taking a seat at the head of the table. Let's walk through the key provisions of the loan agreement. For the next hour, I explained the structure of the commercial construction loan in detail, the disbursement schedule tied to completion milestones, the oversight provisions, the variable interest rate mechanism that rewarded adherence to timeline commitments. Margaret listened intently, asking surprisingly incisive questions about risk assessment and collateral requirements. These oversight provisions, she noted, pointing to a specific clause, they actually benefit both parties, don't they? The bank reduces its risk exposure, but William gains the advantage of expert project management supervision. Exactly, I confirmed, impressed by her quick grasp of the concept. The most successful lending relationships are those where both parties' interests align toward the same outcome. In this case, a completed project that generates sufficient revenue to service the debt comfortably. William watched our interaction with a thoughtful expression, occasionally contributing details about the project itself, but largely allowing Margaret and me to discuss the financial framework. It was a dynamic I could never have imagined a week earlier. My mother-in-law engaging me as a financial peer rather than dismissing my career as a trivial diversion from family responsibilities. As Gerald guided William through the signing process, Margaret leaned toward me. I hope our lunch tomorrow is still on? She asked quietly. Absolutely, I assured her. I'm looking forward to it. She nodded, her expression unusually vulnerable. As am I. There's much I'd like to discuss, beyond banking matters. After the documents were signed and the participants had departed, I remained in the conference room, processing the unexpected interaction with Margaret. Her presence at the loan closing represented a significant shift, not just in how she viewed me, but in how she defined her own role in the family's financial affairs. My assistant's gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Ms. Chen, the executive. Committee is gathering for the operational review, and your husband is online too. I picked up the conference room phone. James, everything okay? Just checking in on the loan closing, he replied. How did it go with Dad? Smooth and professional, I assured him. But the surprise was your mother. She attended as well. Mom was there? James sounded genuinely shocked. At a business meeting? Not just present, actively engaged. She asked excellent questions about the loan structure and seemed genuinely interested in understanding the financial details. James was quiet for a moment. That's unexpected. Mom has always let Dad handle all financial matters. She's never shown interest in the business side before. People can surprise you, I said, echoing our earlier conversation. I think learning about my role at Oakwood may have catalyzed something for her. Maybe seeing you own and run a bank made her reconsider her own relationship with finance, James suggested thoughtfully. Mom's always been intelligent, just channeled in different directions. I'm having lunch with her tomorrow, I reminded him. I'll get a better sense of where her head is then. Let me know how it goes. I'm fascinated to see where this leads. After hanging up, I joined the executive committee meeting, temporarily setting aside family dynamics to focus on quarterly performance metrics and strategic initiatives. Yet throughout the afternoon of back-to-back meetings and decision points, I found my thoughts occasionally drifting to the upcoming lunch with Margaret, a meeting that would once have filled me with dread, but now sparked genuine curiosity. The following day, I arrived at Maison Laurent, an elegant French bistro in Back Bay, 15 minutes early. I had chosen the restaurant deliberately. It was sophisticated but not intimidating, with excellent food and a quiet atmosphere conducive to conversation. Margaret arrived precisely on time, dressed impeccably as always in a tailored navy suit that likely cost more than what most people spent on their entire wardrobe. "Olivia," she greeted me warmly, accepting my brief embrace with more genuineness than her usual air kiss. "Thank you for suggesting this place. I've heard wonderful things but never managed to visit." Once seated and having ordered, salmon niçoise for Margaret, bouillabaisse for me, an awkward silence descended. Despite yesterday's professional interaction and Saturday's revelations, we were still finding our footing in this new dynamic. "I want to thank you for including me in yesterday's meeting," Margaret finally said. It was illuminating in many ways. "I was surprised to see you there," I admitted, "but pleasantly so." Margaret nodded, her fingers tracing the stem of her water glass. "William and I had a long conversation after you and James left on Saturday night. It was revelatory. Not just about you and your accomplishments, but about patterns in our marriage that I've never fully examined." I remained silent, sensing she needed space to continue this clearly difficult conversation. "For 42 years," she went on, "I've deferred to William on all financial matters. Not because I lack capacity to understand them, but because that was the expected division of responsibilities in marriages of our generation and social circle. The wife managed the household and social calendar. The husband handled business and finance." She took a small sip of water before continuing. "Watching you yesterday, confidently explaining complex financial mechanisms, making multi-million-dollar decisions, I realized how much of myself I've submerged over the decades, and how unfairly I judged you for refusing to do the same." Her frankness caught me off guard. In all our previous interactions, Margaret had maintained a carefully polished veneer, never revealing vulnerability or self-doubt. "It's never too late to engage with those parts of yourself," I offered gently. "Perhaps not," she agreed with a small smile. "Which brings me to something I'd like to discuss with you, a proposition of sorts." Our food arrived, temporarily pausing the conversation. Once the server had departed, Margaret continued. "I have a business background, you know. Before I married William, I studied economics at Wellesley. I was one of only 12 women in my year focusing on that field. After graduation, I worked for 2 years at First Boston in their client services department. This was entirely new information. In 7 years of family gatherings, Margaret had never once mentioned her education or work experience. I had no idea, I admitted. "Few people do," Margaret acknowledged. "After William and I married, it was simply expected that I would focus on creating a home and family. My brief career became an interesting footnote rather than a foundation for continued growth." She took a bite of her salmon, clearly gathering her thoughts. "Yesterday, watching you work, I felt something I haven't experienced in decades: intellectual engagement with financial concepts. It was invigorating." "You asked excellent questions," I told her sincerely. "Your grasp of the risk assessment framework was impressive, especially given the complex structure we implemented." Margaret's expression brightened at the professional compliment. "Thank you. That means a great deal coming from you." She hesitated briefly. "Olivia, I'm interested in learning more about modern banking practices, not just as an observer, but as a participant." I set down my spoon, giving her my full attention. "What exactly are you proposing?" "I'm not entirely sure," she admitted. "That's part of why I wanted to speak with you. William has agreed that I should take a more active role in our joint investments, particularly the real estate portfolio. But I recognize that banking has evolved tremendously since my brief professional experience 40 years ago. It certainly has, I agreed. Digital transformation has revolutionized nearly every aspect of financial services. Exactly. And that's where I thought perhaps you might guide me. Not as a family member, but as a professional mentor of sorts. The request was so unexpected that I found myself momentarily speechless. Margaret Parker, who had spent years subtly undermining my career choices, was now asking for my professional mentorship. I realize it's an unusual request, Margaret added quickly, misinterpreting my silence. Especially given our history. I would completely understand if you're not comfortable with the idea. It's not that, I assured her. I'm just surprised, pleasantly surprised. So you might consider it? I contemplated her request, considering both the personal and professional dimensions. From a purely business perspective, helping Margaret understand modern banking would ultimately benefit Oakwood Financial, as William was moving more of his business to our institution. On a personal level, this collaborative approach offered a path to a more authentic relationship with my mother-in-law. I think it's an excellent idea, I decided. Perhaps you could start by attending our quarterly investment symposium next month. It's designed for high-net-worth clients who want to deepen their understanding of current financial strategies. From there, we could structure a more personalized learning plan. Margaret's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. That sounds perfect. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this opportunity, Olivia. It's my pleasure, I replied, surprised to discover I genuinely meant it. As our lunch continued, our conversation flowed more naturally than ever before. Margaret shared stories from her college days, including her experience as one of the few women in economics classes. I described the challenges I'd faced as a young female entrepreneur in the predominantly male financial technology sector. For the first time, we connected as individuals with shared experiences, rather than as reluctant relatives bound by marriage. I wish I'd known all this about you from the beginning, Margaret said as we finished our meal. We've wasted so much time with misunderstandings and assumptions. We can't change the past, I replied, but we can certainly shape what comes next. As we parted outside the restaurant, Margaret surprised me with a genuine hug rather than her customary formal farewell. Thank you, Olivia, not just for lunch, but for your willingness to start fresh despite everything. Driving back to the office, I reflected on the remarkable evolution of my relationship with the Parkers over the span of just 1 week. The carefully constructed barriers between my professional and personal lives had collapsed entirely, yet instead of the anticipated conflict, I had found unexpected understanding and connection. Anthony was waiting in my office when I returned, a concerned expression on his face. We may have a situation with the fintech acquisition, he began without preamble. The target company's lead developer team is threatening to walk if the deal goes through. They're concerned about culture clash and potential product direction changes. I set aside thoughts of family dynamics, my mind immediately shifting to problem-solving mode. Have we spoken directly with the development team, or is this coming through their executive leadership? That's the issue. We've been negotiating exclusively with the C-suite. The developers feel sidelined in the process. I considered the dilemma. The acquisition's value rested largely in the intellectual capital of the development team. Losing them would significantly diminish the strategic benefit of the purchase. Set up a meeting, I decided. Not with the executives, but directly. With the lead developers. Tomorrow, if possible. I want to hear their concerns firsthand and address them personally. Anthony raised an eyebrow. You'll handle this yourself? It's relatively small compared to other deals we're working on. The technology integration is crucial to our small business lending strategy, I explained. And sometimes, developers respond better to straightforward technical discussions than corporate reassurances. I speak their language. That you do, Anthony acknowledged with a smile. I'll set it up and forward their GitHub repositories so you can review their codebase before the meeting. After Anthony left, I turned to my computer to prepare for the upcoming developer meeting, my mind fully engaged with the technical and strategic challenges of the acquisition. Hours passed in focused work, the afternoon sun shifting across my office as I immersed myself in code reviews and architecture diagrams. A text from James interrupted my concentration. How was lunch with Mom? I paused, realizing I hadn't updated him on the surprising development. Transformative. She's asked me to mentor her in modern banking practices. She wants to take an active role in their investments. His response came quickly. You're kidding. Mom wants to learn banking from you? The same woman who told you last Christmas that ambition in women often comes at the expense of family values. People contain multitudes, I texted back. She studied economics at Wellesley and worked at First Boston before marrying your father. Did you know that? No idea, came his stunned reply. She's never mentioned that. We've all been operating with incomplete information, I observed. The Parker family has more layers than any of us realized. As I set down my phone, I was struck by how profoundly the power dynamics had shifted within my extended family. William, once condescending about my financial acumen, was now bringing his business to my bank and accepting my guidance on his troubled development project. Margaret, who had repeatedly suggested I focus on traditional female roles instead of career advancement, was now seeking my professional mentorship. Yet the most significant change wasn't in how they viewed me, but in how I viewed myself. For years, I had compartmentalized my identity. Olivia, the successful banker, remained separate from Olivia, the daughter-in-law. That separation had been a defensive strategy, a way to protect my professional confidence from the constant undermining I experienced in family settings. Now, with those worlds merging, I was discovering the freedom of being fully integrated, of bringing my whole self to every interaction. My phone rang, the call I had been waiting for from the acquisition target's lead developer. I took a deep breath, centering myself in this new, unified identity, and picked up the receiver. Olivia Chen speaking. Ms. Chen, this is Ravi Mehta from TechFin Solutions. Your office said you wanted to speak with me directly about the acquisition concerns. Yes, Ravi. I've been reviewing your distributed ledger implementation for small business loan processing. The consensus algorithm you've developed is elegantly designed, particularly the way you've addressed the double spending problem while maintaining ACID compliance. There was a moment of surprised silence before Ravi responded, his tone shifting from formal to engaged. You've actually looked at the codebase. Most acquiring executives just review the executive summary sheets. I'm not most executives, I replied simply. And your team's technological innovation is precisely why Oakwood is interested in this acquisition. I'd like to meet with you and your lead developers tomorrow to discuss how we can ensure your work continues and expands under the Oakwood umbrella. Yes, we'd welcome that conversation, Ravi said, his initial reluctance clearly dissolving. It would be refreshing to discuss the technical aspects directly rather than through layers of management. We scheduled the meeting for the following morning, and I returned to my review of their code repositories, making notes about potential integration points with Oakwood's existing systems. The technical complexities were a welcome focus after days of emotional navigation with the Parkers. At 7, I realized I had worked straight through the evening without a break. I packed up my materials, deciding to continue my review at home where I could consult with James. While his medical expertise was far removed from financial technology, his logical approach to problem-solving often provided valuable perspective on technical challenges. The drive home through Boston's evening traffic gave me time to reflect on the whirlwind developments of the past week. My carefully separated worlds had collided, yet instead of the anticipated chaos, a new and unexpected harmony was emerging. William and Margaret were seeing me, truly seeing me perhaps for the first time. The bank's leadership structure was formally aligning with its operational reality, and I was discovering the freedom of bringing my whole self to every aspect of my life. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed James sitting on the front steps of our brownstone, 2 glasses of wine beside him. He stood as I approached, handing me one of the glasses. "Thought you might need this after lunch with my mother," he said with a smile. "Though from your texts, it sounds like it went surprisingly well." "Better than well," I confirmed, settling beside him on the steps. The evening was mild for Boston in spring, with the last of the day's warmth lingering in the air. "Your mother is much more complex than I've given her credit for." "That seems to be the theme of the week," James observed. "Riley, hidden depths in the Parker family." I laughed, leaning against his shoulder. "Indeed, though I think we've established that I'm the queen of compartmentalization." "Were," James corrected gently. "You were the queen of compartmentalization. Now you're just Olivia Chen, brilliant banker, loving wife, and apparently my mother's new professional mentor." Life takes unexpected turns. He clinked his glass against mine. 2 unexpected turns, and to finally being seen for exactly who you are. I smiled, watching the sunset paint golden light across our neighborhood's historic facades. "I'll drink to that." The morning of Oakwood Financial's quarterly board meeting arrived with a sense of momentous change. For 7 years, I had attended these meetings in my carefully crafted dual role, officially as Chief Innovation Officer with Anthony Caldwell serving as CEO, while unofficially, everyone in the boardroom understood I was the controlling shareholder directing the bank's strategy. Today, that carefully maintained fiction would end. I dressed with particular care, selecting a tailored charcoal suit that projected authority without ostentation. The subtle power dressing wasn't for the board's benefit. They had long ago accepted my leadership, but for the financial media representatives who would attend the press conference following the meeting. Today marked my first public step into the spotlight as Oakwood's chief executive. James had already left for the hospital when I came downstairs, but he'd left coffee brewing and a handwritten note on the kitchen counter. "Today's the day you buy. Stop hiding. So proud of you. Love, Jay." His simple encouragement brought an unexpected lump to my throat. Through all the years of compartmentalization, James had been my constant supporter, never questioning my decision to keep my professional success separate from family life, but always ready for the day when I would finally integrate these divided worlds. The board meeting proceeded smoothly, with unanimous approval for the leadership reorganization that would formally establish me as CEO, while transitioning Anthony to President and COO. The quarterly financials showed continued strong performance, with loan growth exceeding projections and digital platform adoption rates climbing steadily. The fintech acquisition was back on track after my direct intervention with the development team. They had signed retention agreements after I personally guaranteed their technological autonomy within the larger Oakwood structure. As the meeting concluded, Winston Edwards, our longest-serving board member and former Federal Reserve economist, approached me with a warm smile. "I've been waiting for this day for years, Olivia," he said, his voice carrying the gentle Southern accent that 7 decades in Boston had never quite erased. "Your father would be immensely proud." The mention of my father sent an unexpected wave of emotion through me. Thomas Chen had been a brilliant cardiac surgeon, respected throughout Boston's medical community, but always an outsider by virtue of his immigrant background. He had taught me early that excellence was the only reliable currency in a world that might never fully accept me. "Thank you, Winston," I replied, composing myself quickly. "That means a great deal." I worked with him on the hospital's finance committee, Winston continued. He approached institutional finances with the same precision he brought to surgery. "I see that quality in you." I smiled at the comparison. "High praise indeed." "Well deserved," Winston assured me. "Now, are you ready for the press?" They're gathering in the conference center. I nodded, gathering my notes for the announcement. As ready as I'll ever be. The conference room was filled beyond capacity with representatives from major financial publications, local business reporters, and industry analysts all crowded together, alerted by our press release about a significant leadership announcement at Oakwood Financial. I scanned the crowd, surprised to see William and Margaret seated in the back row. They hadn't mentioned attending, but their presence felt right somehow. Witnesses to this final dissolution of the boundary between my personal and professional lives. Anthony introduced me with gracious professionalism, emphasizing our long partnership and shared vision for Oakwood's future. When I stepped to the podium, the camera flashes momentarily disoriented me, a visceral reminder that I was stepping out of the shadows and into public visibility. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in my stomach. Today, Oakwood Financial is announcing a leadership reorganization that formalizes the executive structure that has guided our institution's transformation over the past 7 years. I outlined the changes succinctly, my formal assumption of the CEO position alongside my role as chairwoman, Anthony's transition to president and COO, and several other executive adjustments that aligned our public leadership with operational reality. The business press received this as the significant but unsurprising development it was, with questions focused primarily on our strategic direction and growth projections. It wasn't until a young reporter from the Boston Business Journal raised her hand that the questioning took an unexpected turn. "Ms. Chen, you've been the majority shareholder and strategic leader of Oakwood Financial for 7 years, yet you've maintained a relatively low public profile. Was there a specific business strategy behind keeping your controlling interest and full leadership role out of public view until now?" The question was astute, cutting directly to the unusual nature of my behind-the-scenes approach. I could feel William and Margaret's attention sharpen from the back of the room. "There were multiple factors," I acknowledged. "When I acquired controlling interest in Oakwood, the institution was at a critical juncture requiring significant technological and operational transformation. I determined that these changes would be most effectively implemented with minimal public disruption or market speculation about new ownership." It was a polished, professional answer, and entirely true as far as it went. I could have ended there, with the business rationale that had indeed been part of my decision-making. But something prompted me to continue, to offer a more personal dimension. "Additionally," I added, "as a young woman of color in banking leadership, I recognized certain preconceptions that might create unnecessary resistance to the changes we needed to implement. By focusing on results rather than personality, we allowed Oakwood's performance to speak for itself." A murmur ran through the room at this candid acknowledgement of the industry's biases. The reporter nodded appreciatively at my frankness. "And what's changed now?" she pressed. "Why formalize the leadership structure at this particular moment?" I smiled. "Results speak louder than preconceptions. Oakwood's asset growth, technological leadership, and community impact have established our approach as successful. The formal leadership alignment simply recognizes what has been operational reality for some time." The press conference continued for another 20 minutes, with questions about the fintech acquisition, our small business lending expansion, and digital banking initiatives. Throughout, I maintained the composed, authoritative presence I had, cultivated in boardrooms for years, though the public dimension felt new and slightly uncomfortable. As the event concluded and journalists began to disperse, William and Margaret approached the podium. Margaret reached me first, surprising me, with a warm embrace. "You were magnificent," she said with genuine admiration, "so poised and knowledgeable." "Thank you for coming," I replied, touched by their presence. "I didn't expect to see you here." "We wouldn't have missed it," William assured me, shaking my hand with newfound respect. "Quite a moment. Your public emergence as one of Boston's most influential banking executives. An assistant appeared at my elbow, apologetically interrupting. "Ms. Chen, the governor's office is on the line. Something about the Economic Development Committee appointment?" "I need to take that," I explained to the Parkers. "But I'd love to continue this conversation. Perhaps dinner this weekend?" "We'd be delighted," Margaret agreed quickly. "Our house, Saturday evening?" I nodded agreement before being whisked away to my office for the call from the governor's economic policy director. The conversation was brief but significant. An invitation to join the state's Financial Innovation Advisory Board, a prestigious appointment that would have been unlikely before my public identification as Oakwood's CEO. The remainder of the day passed in a blur of meetings, decisions, and congratulatory messages from industry colleagues. By the time I headed home, evening had settled over Boston, the city lights twinkling against the darkening sky. I was exhausted but exhilarated, feeling the curious lightness that comes from setting down a long-carried burden. James was waiting with takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of champagne chilling in an ice bucket. To Olivia, "Chen," he toasted, pouring the sparkling wine into flutes. "Banking powerhouse and no longer Boston's best-kept secret." I laughed, clinking my glass against his. "The press conference went well, I think. Your parents were there." "So Mom texted me," James replied with a smile. "Apparently you were absolutely commanding, and precisely what banking leadership should look like. Her words, not mine, though I certainly agree." "That doesn't sound like the Margaret Parker I've known for 7 years," I observed, taking a sip of champagne. "I think we're all getting to know a different Margaret Parker these days," James mused. "Speaking of which, Mom mentioned something about a banking course? Said you're setting her up with some kind of professional education program?" I nodded, serving the pad thai onto plates. "She's attending our quarterly investment symposium next month as a starting point. From there, we'll develop a customized learning plan focused on modern banking practices and digital financial services." James shook his head in amazement. "I still can't wrap my mind around this. My mother, who once told you that your career was a temporary diversion before settling into family life, is now becoming your banking protégé? Life takes unexpected turns," I reminded him, echoing our conversation from earlier in the week. We ate dinner in comfortable companionship, discussing the day's events and the implications of my now public leadership position. As we cleared the dishes, James brought up something I hadn't considered. "Have you thought about how this will affect your relationship with your in-laws socially? Now that you're publicly identified as Oakwood's CEO, their friends and associates will all know about your position." I paused, dishcloth in hand. I hadn't thought about that aspect. The focus has been on the professional implications. "The Boston banking community is small and interconnected," James pointed out. "Dad's colleagues and competitors will now have to reconcile the fact that his daughter-in-law owns and runs a financial institution that's increasingly competing with their own. That could be awkward," I acknowledged, considering the complex social dynamics of Boston's financial elite. William Parker had spent decades cultivating relationships with other banking executives, relationships now complicated by my emerging public profile. "Actually, I think Dad might enjoy it," James said with a surprising grin. "He's always appreciated being the one with inside information or special connections. Having a direct family link to Oakwood's CEO gives him a certain cachet in his circles." I laughed at the irony. "So after years of dismissing my career, he might now actively leverage his connection to me for social capital?" "Welcome to the Parker family dynamics," James replied wryly. "Status and connection have always been the currency." The thought stayed with me as we finished cleaning up and moved to the living room. There was something oddly fitting about William potentially benefiting socially from the very career he had spent years minimizing. Not that it bothered me. If anything, it added another layer of subtle irony to our evolving relationship. Saturday evening arrived with unusual anticipation. Dinner at the Parkers had been a regular obligation throughout my marriage to James. But tonight felt different, the first social gathering since the public revelation of my position at Oakwood, and the dramatic shift in family dynamics. James sensed my unusual attention to detail as I changed outfits twice before settling on a deep burgundy dress that walked the line between elegant and businesslike. "Nervous?" he asked, adjusting his tie in the mirror. "Not nervous exactly," I replied, considering the sentiment. "Just recalibrating. For 7 years, I've played a particular role at these family dinners. Now everything's different." James came to stand behind me, meeting my eyes in the mirror. "You don't have to play any role tonight. Just be yourself, the complete integrated Olivia Chen, banking executive, brilliant strategist, and my extraordinary wife." His simple encouragement centered me, as it had so many times before. "You're right. No more compartmentalization." The evening at the Parkers' elegant Beacon Hill home began with a surprise. 2 additional couples were present, seated in the formal living room with cocktails when we arrived. I recognized them immediately: Jonathan and Claire Whitmore from Boston Trust Bank, and Edward and Sophia Patterson from Commonwealth Financial Group. Both men were prominent figures in Boston banking circles and longtime associates of William. "James, Olivia," William greeted us enthusiastically. "You remember the Whitmores and the Pattersons, of course." The greeting was a polite fiction. I had met both couples briefly at charity events, but had never been introduced in my professional capacity. Tonight was clearly different, as Jonathan Whitmore rose immediately to shake my hand. "Olivia, congratulations on the Oakwood announcement," he said with genuine respect. "Your digital banking platform has been giving us a run for our money. In the mid-market segment. Impressive innovation." I thanked him for the professional acknowledgement, noting William's barely concealed satisfaction at this interaction between his daughter-in-law and his banking colleague. Margaret appeared at my elbow with a glass of wine, her eyes twinkling with newfound conspiratorial warmth. "I hope you don't mind the additional guests," she murmured. William was quite insistent on hosting a small gathering to, as he put it, properly introduce Olivia in her professional capacity. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same man who had spent years dismissing my financial acumen was now eagerly facilitating professional connections based on my banking leadership. Rather than finding it annoying, I was oddly touched by the gesture. William was, in his own way, attempting to make amends for years of underestimation. Dinner conversation flowed with surprising ease, centered largely on banking industry trends, regulatory challenges, and digital transformation efforts. I found myself engaged in substantive professional discussion with Jonathan and Edward, while Margaret asked insightful questions that revealed her ongoing self-education in modern finance. Olivia has been kind enough to include me in Oakwood's upcoming investment symposium, she mentioned during a discussion of financial literacy initiatives. I'm quite looking forward to refreshing my knowledge of contemporary financial practices. Claire Whitmore looked at Margaret with new interest. "I didn't realize you had a background in finance, Margaret." "Economics at Wellesley, followed by a brief career at First Boston before I married William," Margaret replied with newfound confidence in her professional history. I'm discovering it's never too late to re-engage with that part of myself. I caught James's eye across the table, sharing a moment of private amazement at his mother's transformation. The woman who had spent decades defining herself exclusively through her roles as wife, mother, and society hostess was reclaiming parts of her identity long submerged beneath family expectations. As dessert was served, Edward Patterson turned the conversation directly to me. "Olivia, the innovation coming out of Oakwood in recent years has been remarkable. Your distributed ledger implementation for small business lending is genuinely groundbreaking. How did you develop the expertise to lead that kind of technological initiative?" Before I could respond, William surprised me by answering for me, not to dismiss or minimize as he might have in the past, but to proudly highlight my background. Olivia founded and sold a financial technology company before acquiring Oakwood, he informed Edward, with the satisfaction of sharing insider knowledge. Secure Pay, the payment processing platform that revolutionized small merchant transactions. The acquisition was quite significant, though Olivia has always been modest about her accomplishments. The table fell silent for a moment, all eyes turning to me with new appreciation. I felt a curious mixture of emotions: pleasure at William's accurate representation of my background, amazement at his complete reversal from dismissiveness to pride, and the lingering strangeness of having my professional identity so completely integrated with my family role. William's right, I acknowledged with a small smile, though I wouldn't call it modesty so much as strategic focus. Success in financial technology often comes from emphasizing innovative solutions rather than individual personalities. Well, your solutions have certainly been innovative, Edward replied with professional respect. Commonwealth has been benchmarking against your small business lending protocols for the past year. As the evening continued, I observed the subtle but profound shift in dynamics. For 7 years, I had been the outsider at Parker family gatherings, tolerated, but never fully accepted, particularly by William and Margaret. Now, I was not only accepted, but showcased, with my professional achievements becoming a source of family pride rather than uncomfortable divergence from tradition. After our guests departed, William opened a bottle of aged scotch in his study, inviting James and me to join him while Margaret made coffee. "A successful evening, I think," William observed, handing us each a crystal tumbler. "Jonathan was quite impressed with your distributed ledger implementation, Olivia. He mentioned the possibility of a correspondent banking arrangement between Boston Trust and Oakwood." "That would be worth exploring," I agreed, sipping the expensive scotch. "Their international services would complement our domestic strengths." William nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. 7 years, he said abruptly. 7 years of family dinners where I talked over you, dismissed your insights, and generally treated you as financially naive. All while you were building one of the most innovative banks in the region. His candor caught me off guard. William Parker was not a man given to direct acknowledgement of his misjudgments. "Water under the bridge," I offered, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected openness. William shook his head firmly. "No, it needs to be said explicitly. I was wrong about you, Olivia. Profoundly, persistently wrong. And I'm genuinely sorry for the years of condescension you endured from." The apology was so straightforward, so devoid of qualification or excuses, that I found myself momentarily speechless. James reached over to squeeze my hand, his expression a mix of surprise and appreciation for his father's uncharacteristic humility. "Thank you, William," I finally said. "That means a great deal." Margaret entered with a tray of coffee, catching the tail end of our conversation. "Are you finally apologizing properly?" she asked her husband with surprising directness. "About time." William actually chuckled, accepting the gentle admonishment with good grace. "Yes, dear. Better late than never, I hope." "Much better," Margaret agreed, serving the coffee with practiced elegance. "Now, Olivia, I've been reading the materials you sent over about the investment symposium. The section on algorithmic trading raises several questions I'd like to discuss." As Margaret launched into a surprisingly technical inquiry about quantitative investment strategies, I caught James watching his parents with undisguised amazement. The transformation in their attitude toward me, and in Margaret's case, toward her own intellectual engagement with finance, was remarkable by any standard. Later that night, as James and I prepared for bed in our brownstone, he shook his head, in lingering disbelief. "I keep waiting to wake up," he admitted. "My father apologizing without qualification? My mother discussing algorithmic trading systems? You being celebrated rather than tolerated at a Parker family gathering? It's like we've slipped into an alternate universe." I smiled, removing my earrings and placing them in the jewelry box, on our dresser. People can change when confronted with undeniable evidence that challenges their preconceptions. Your parents' worldview couldn't accommodate the reality of my position at Oakwood, so their worldview had to shift. Still, James marveled, the completeness of the transformation is stunning. Dad actually seemed proud to introduce you as a banking executive to his colleagues. I think on some level he's relieved, I suggested, considering William's behavior throughout the evening. For years, he's had to navigate the cognitive dissonance between his dismissive attitude toward me and his genuine respect for financial accomplishment. Now, those positions are aligned rather than contradictory. James considered this analysis. That makes sense. Dad's always valued professional success above almost everything else. Once he was forced to acknowledge yours, it became something to celebrate rather than dismiss. As we settled into bed, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 weeks. From the moment William's loan application had landed on my desk to tonight's dinner, where I had been fully integrated as both family member and respected professional, the transformation had been more complete than I could have imagined. You know what's strange? I said softly as James turned out the light. I kept my professional success separate from your family, partly because I didn't think they would ever truly accept or acknowledge it. But now that everything is in the open, their acceptance seems genuine. It is genuine, James assured me, pulling me close. That's the irony. You might have received this acceptance years ago if they'd known the full extent of your accomplishments. No, I disagreed gently. 7 years ago, William wasn't capable of seeing past his preconceptions, regardless of evidence. It took time and his own experiences to create the openness necessary for this transformation. James couldn't argue with this assessment. Well, whatever the timing, I'm glad you're finally being seen for who you truly are, by my parents and by the wider world. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in Oakwood Financial's newly expanded headquarters, preparing to announce our most successful quarter to date. The audience included not only the usual financial press and industry analysts, but also Margaret Parker, attending in her new capacity as a member of our Community Banking Advisory Board. The appointment had raised a few eyebrows given our family connection, but Margaret's revitalized background in economics combined with her deep ties to Boston's community organizations made her a legitimately valuable addition to the advisory group. More importantly, her commitment to learning modern banking practices had proven genuine and sustained, with her insights increasingly beneficial to our community outreach initiatives. William's North End development project was nearing completion, on schedule and within budget thanks to the oversight mechanisms we had implemented through the loan agreement. He had taken to consulting me regularly on financial aspects of his real estate ventures, our professional relationship evolving alongside our personal one into something based on mutual respect rather than hierarchy or condescension. As I outlined, Oakwood's record-breaking performance to the assembled audience, I caught sight of James slipping into the back of the room, still wearing surgical scrubs from his morning procedures. Despite his demanding schedule at the hospital, he had made a point of attending this particular announcement, the public unveiling of our Small Business Innovation Center, a project particularly close to my heart. Today, Oakwood Financial is proud to announce the establishment of the Thomas Chen Center for Financial Innovation, I said, revealing the initiative named for my father. This $20 million commitment will provide technology resources, mentorship, and capital access to underserved entrepreneurs throughout New England. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause, particularly from Margaret, who had been instrumental in shaping the community engagement aspects of the center. As the formal presentation concluded and attendees began networking, James made his way to the front of the room, greeting his mother with a kiss on the cheek before joining me at the podium. "Dad would have been so proud," he said quietly, taking my hand. "Not just of the center bearing his name, but of everything you've built, both professionally and personally." I nodded, emotion making speech momentarily difficult. Thomas Chen had taught me the value of excellence as currency in a world that might otherwise dismiss me, but he had also emphasized the importance of building genuine connections beyond professional accomplishment. Looking around the room at the network of relationships I had cultivated, colleagues, mentors, community partners, and yes, even family, I felt the profound integration of all aspects of my life in a way that would have pleased him deeply. "No more compartments," I said, to James, squeezing his hand. "Just one complete life." "One extraordinary life," he corrected with a smile. Margaret joined us, her expression reflecting genuine pride. "The center is a magnificent initiative, Olivia. Your father's legacy of service lives on through your work." The genuine warmth in her voice, from a woman who had once suggested my career was merely a distraction from my real purpose as a wife, represented perhaps the most profound transformation of all. Not just in how others saw me, but in how they understood themselves and their own potential for growth and change. William approached with Edward Patterson. Both men engaged in animated discussion about Oakwood's innovative lending practices. Seeing us, William paused the conversation to acknowledge the announcement. "Brilliant presentation, Olivia," he said with genuine admiration. "The Chen Center will transform opportunities for countless entrepreneurs." "Thank you," I replied simply, accepting the compliment with the same straightforward confidence I now brought to all my interactions, personal and professional alike. As the event continued around us, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought us to this moment. A loan application that revealed a hidden truth. A family forced to confront its preconceptions. A professional identity finally integrated with personal relationships. The bank I secretly owned was secret no longer. The expertise I had carefully compartmentalized was now fully acknowledged. And the family that had once treated me with dismissive condescension now embraced both me and my accomplishments with genuine appreciation. Life indeed takes unexpected turns. Sometimes those turns lead exactly where we need to go, even when the destination wasn't what we initially imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.